Welcome to Southminster Steinhauer United Church, everyone. Welcome to this place of spiritual exploration, to a community built on diversity and the work of outreach and justice. Welcome to this circle where we're invited to open ourselves to compassion and depth, knowing that we're each important, that we're each valued, and that we're each able to live and make a difference in our world. No matter who we are welcome and safe to explore what we need to explore honestly here in this space, and so we're welcome. As we meet here together on this Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter, we're following a long spiritual tradition of evaluating our lives and our world with an eye toward justice and inclusion, and with hope always of committing to a life that inspires us to live deeply, to grow every day in our awakening and in our wisdom. May we be reminded here of our highest aspirations, inspired to bring our gifts of love, compassion, justice to our humanity. May we know once again here this morning that we're not isolated beings, but we're connected to each other in body, spirit, mystery, to the universe, to this community, and to each other. Let's gather in words and in singing. We light this candle again. We light this candle that is the same light that shines in our universe, in our celestial objects, ancient and near, that shines in the lives of those past and present, and in each of us, a light that we can share. This is a light that we can cherish, which holds all that is sacred and meaningful as we make our way together. We honor with our candle as well the place in which we gather. This place that is situated on ancestral sacred land of the Cree people of Treaty 6, of the Papas Chase First Nation, where we honor what has come before us and where we seek to live together in relationship with this land and with all her peoples, and to work daily toward an attitude and life of reconciliation and partnership. It's in this spirit of reconciliation and partnership that we gather this morning with a moment of reconciliation that seeks to place us in our history, in our time. Gail, thank you.
As we honor the land on which we live, we know those before us who came here also honored this land. Henry Bird Steinhauer, after whom we are named, was a Methodist minister trained in the Methodist school system in Ontario, well, Upper Canada anyway, who came to this territory in 1855. He was an Ojibwe, and he had experience with land use and the takeover of native land in that area. His mother's people had taken land and then been moved as European settlers required what was good arable land, and the native people were moved to less valuable land. With the people among whom Steiner worked at Whitefish Lake, he continued to honor many of the native traditions, including the buffalo hunt, but he also helped them find another way to use the land and taught them agricultural skills. In his mission work, he drew parallels between native legends and Bible stories. Significantly, what he had seen in the East allowed him to help chiefs such as Pacan prepare for treaty negotiations for Treaty 6. Pacan was considered to be the best prepared of all native leaders at the meetings, with specific guidelines of what the people needed. Not all his requests were met, but he was prepared and he understood what was going on. Steiner was revered among the people of Whitefish Lake. Following the 1885 Northwest Rebellion, Pacan explained why he kept his people from becoming involved. Steiner had died several months earlier, and Pacan's explanation was that he owed a great debt to his old friend, Henry Bird Steinhauer, and called him a man who taught peace. That was Steiner's legacy. And we too can honor that legacy today by teaching and working for peace.
When we think about the things that we wish and desire in our lives, those intentions that we would hope to live by, we formulate them in our minds and we seek to live each day by them. But when we gather here on a Sunday morning, we have a way of doing it together. And they may not be specific to our lives, each and every one of us, but they speak to our collective intention, what it is we seek to be in this world as people of spirit, as people and citizens of the universe. And so we gather and join our words together in the hopes that we might strengthen each other as we speak them. We gather in gratitude for the gift of life, the mystery of consciousness, and our inclination toward purpose. In a world where violence shakes our peace, obstinance inhibits mutuality, and overt individualism diminishes community, we gather to seek strength in confronting our world with our spirited living. May we strengthen our intention to bring healing to hurt, peace to violence, beauty to harshness, and justice to all brokenness. May we find courage and grace to live according to our highest values and worthy of our common humanity. We pray as those born of light and love, that it might be so. This is our time for all ages. It's a time when I invite anyone who'd like to come forward to our carpet here to come for a story and for a chat. And you can be small or you can be tall. You can be young or you can be not so young to come to our carpet. Sometimes at this time I tell a story from a book and pictures, and there's lots of fun things to look at. And today, we're going to use our imaginations. I don't have a book with pictures to show you, but the story has something to do with these things, these leaves, these palm leaves that we were given today. And if you don't have one, there's lots around. You can find one still. A long time ago, when a teacher named Jesus was leading and teaching, his land was not very peaceful. The place where he lived, there were soldiers in the streets. And those soldiers liked to walk around with their knives and their swords and their spears, and they liked to scare people so that they would follow the rules. In this time when Jesus was teaching, some of those rules were fair, and some of them were not. In this time when Jesus was teaching, those armies took over people's land. And they said, "This is our place now. We're going to be in control." So it wasn't a very fun place to live. Sometimes these soldiers would ride around and they'd march down the streets. And they would do that just to remind everyone who was in charge. So even if you were walking down the street and you saw someone walk by, or there was a parade of a lot of soldiers walking by, you remembered, oh yeah, I better pay attention to them. One day, Jesus and his friends decided that they would hold a parade of their own. Because, it's not just good to have parades when you're feeling happy. It's also very important to do fun things when life isn't so happy. Because if life isn't happy and you never do anything fun, you would never do anything fun. So sometimes you have to celebrate the things that are good. Even if some things are bad, you have to celebrate the things that are good. And sometimes you have to do things your own way. So remember the parades that these armies would have? The soldiers would go down the streets on their horses or with their weapons, and they would want everyone to pay attention. Well, they decided to have a parade in their own way. They didn't have any weapons, so they carried these. Silly, right? But they're kind of like pom-poms, or they're kind of like, I don't know, streamers, or they could get them off the tree, so they were easy to find. They didn't have to go to the store or the shop and get them. They just got them off the trees, and they waved them because it would be a fun thing to do. And the other things they did is they went into town, and they decided that they were having a parade, that they could celebrate good things. Like celebrate teaching people about peace, and celebrate how peace could come, even if it didn't look like it with all these soldiers around. So it was a good thing to do because it reminded them that there were still good things to celebrate. And that's, I think, a good message for us, that Jesus and his friends had a parade, even when life didn't look all that great. They used whatever they had to celebrate good. So you know what? That's a good lesson for us. We can do that too. Sometimes I have a bad day. I can tell you that earlier this week I got sick, and that was not a fun day. But I wonder, what are some good things? Have you all been sick? Have you all had sick days where you're feeling yucky? What's something, you feel terrible, but what's a good thing that we could celebrate on a day that we're sick? Can you think of anything? What's something good? Sure, what?
Sharing and also being a friend.
Being a friend to someone who's sick, or having a friend when you're sick? Good one. Does anyone ever take care of you? That's worth celebrating, because it would, as bad as we feel when we're sick, it would feel even worse if we were all by ourselves. If we had no one to care about us, to look after us, or even to call us, or to see how we were doing. That would be even worse. So there are always some small things to celebrate, and that's what this is about. Celebrating even when things look bad, because it gives us hope. It gives us hope. It reminds us, you know what? One day peace will come, or, hey, you know what? One day we'll feel better. One day our day won't be quite as bad as this one. So that's a wonderful lesson for us to learn, to look for things to celebrate. So how about we celebrate as we sing a song? We can celebrate today that there's more fun stories and activities and games to play in Kid Spirit. We could celebrate that. We could celebrate that we have wonderful things that we can do with our day. So let's sing a song. I'll invite you to go with your leaders to Kid Spirit. And any youth in the room are invited to the Time for All Ages today.
The story we have this morning is found in the work of the gospel writer Luke, and it's his story of the entry of the teacher Jesus into Jerusalem. These are the words. When he had finished the parable, he walked on ahead on the way to Jerusalem. And as it so happened, as he got close to Bethphage and Bethany at the mount called Olives, that he sent off 2 of the disciples with these instructions. Go into the village across the way. As you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, one that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks, why are you untying it? Just tell them, its master has need of it. So those designated went off and found it exactly as he had described. Just as they were untying the colt, its owners challenged them. What are you doing untying that colt? So they said, its master needs it. So they brought it to Jesus. They threw their cloaks on the colt and helped Jesus mount it. And as he rode along, people would spread their cloaks on the road. As he approached the slope of the Mount of Olives, the entire throng of his disciples began to cheer and shout praise to God for all the miracles they had seen. They kept repeating, this is where you need your palm branches. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. They might have been a little more enthusiastic, but that was... But some of the Pharisees also in the crowd said to him, Teacher, restrain your followers. But he responded, I tell you, if these folks were to keep quiet, these stones would break into cheers.
These are words from the Christian tradition passed down to us from the first century. The following is an excerpt from The Powers That Be by Walter Wink. In our society, nothing has ever remotely rivaled the myth of violence. This violence has not been rivaled in its ability to catechize its young so totally. From the earliest age, children are awash in depictions of violence as the ultimate solution to human conflicts. Cartoons, comic book superheroes, and the like. Nor does saturation in the myth end with the close of adolescence. There's a years-long assimilation to adult television and movie fare, where violence is the ultimate remedy. Our culture is so inured to violence that it finds it hard to believe in anything else. People trust violence. Violence saves. It's redemptive. But when we make survival the highest goal and death the greatest evil, we hand ourselves over to the gods of the domination system. We trust violence because we're afraid, and will not relinquish our fears until we're able to imagine a better alternative. The vast majority of us reject nonviolence because there are too many situations where we cannot conceive of it working. What if we're attacked by muggers? What if robbers break into our house? What if our nation gets embroiled in a global battle? The what if question arises out of genuine moral perplexity. Millions of years of conditioning in the flight or fight response have done nothing to prepare us for any other way of responding to violence. What if dilemmas, far from being destructive, though, can provide useful rehearsals of nonviolent possibilities? What if you're a woman walking home from the bus stop on a deserted street, laden with heavy packages, and you realize that you're being followed? Here is Dorothy Samuel's story. As the footsteps behind her got closer, she wheeled suddenly, smiled at the stranger who was advancing on her, handing him her packages, and saying, "Thank God you showed up. I hate to walk alone in the streets, and these bags are so heavy." He escorted her home safely, where she was met by her family. Here is the story that catches the exact moment when a homeless man was able to cross the divide between violence and nonviolence. It's told by Janet Wolfe, a United Methodist minister in Nashville. We have a Bible study during the middle of the week, and we try to use it as a time to care for each other and hold each other accountable. And John came in one night. He's homeless, as are a number of folks in the congregation. And he said, "All right, I'm going to tell this story on myself before anyone else tells it. You all know I've been trying to turn my life around, and it hasn't been easy. What you don't know probably is how bad I was. I mean, I was so bad I had all the cars and all the women and all the money and all the power that any one person could want. I was so bad that when I walked down the street, folks crossed to the other side just to get out of my way. I'm trying to turn my life around, and my life's gotten worse. Last night, I spent the night at the mission, nowhere else to go. I wake up this morning, and someone's stolen my shoes. You all hear what I'm talking about? Someone stole my shoes. So I get my knife out. I hadn't given up that part of my old life. It's a big knife, and I'm walking down all those tables because I mean to get my shoes back. And Jim starts hollering at me from the other side of the room. You remember what we talked about in Bible study? About if they take your cloak and you got another, to give them that one too? John, put down that knife. They took your shoes, give them your socks. And I tell him, I'm not giving him my socks. I want my shoes back. And I go up and down there with my knife, and I mean to get my shoes. And Jim keeps hollering, and he hollers, and he hollers. Put down that knife and give me your socks. So I folded up my knife slowly, but I folded it up. I put it in my pocket. I walked barefoot to the service center this morning. I begged another pair of shoes. Damn if it isn't hard to live this stuff. Unless the churches take our commitment to shatter domination and find and practice alternatives, we don't just fail to live the spiritual inheritance of our founder. We literally cost people their lives. This is the writing of a 20th century theologian. May we find wisdom for our living. So this is one of the few weeks of the year where the story of our tradition presents us with our topic and our theme in a way much like Christmas and Easter does. This is Palm Sunday. And like those two other big festivals in the life of the church, there's ritual and tradition that pull strongly toward the story of this day. Last year, when I forgot all these palms in my garage on Sunday morning, the question was not uncommon that morning to me that said, "Chris, where are the palms? It's Palm Sunday." Even though we're not a traditional church, there are days in the year that call on our tradition. Having said that, what we do with this story, like what we do with Christmas and Easter stories as rational people seeking wisdom, make all the difference. As the story goes, Jesus is compelled to go to Jerusalem during the Passover festival. Visiting the temple at that time in the Jewish tradition was customary by anyone who could make the journey. And Jesus was a teacher, a rabbi. What made this trip different was that he had made a bit of a name for himself. He was on the watch list, so to speak. He'd been heard teaching such outrageous things as that people should be able to have a spiritual life of their own. Go figure. He was heard teaching that maybe people don't need to rely on the priests of the temple to control their access to the sacred. He was teaching about the radical idea of resisting the political occupation of the Roman Empire, maintaining that there are realms of life and living that cannot be controlled. He was teaching a radical inclusiveness that would erase barriers of gender and nationality, tribe and religion, all threats to the establishment order that would use those very clear separations as a means to control and dominate. So you can see, in the halls of power in Jerusalem, he wasn't the most popular individual. So despite every caution to stay away from Jerusalem, the center of all that would silence him, he goes anyway. And the way he does it gives us, in part, a framework for how he and us begin to topple every system of domination. He does it by defining what it means to be a resistor. In an occupied territory, it's common for the occupying force to make displays of their power. This happens by having processions of their military power, commanders on horses, soldiers in ranks, marching through areas, especially ones that might be in turmoil or at risk of unrestfulness, where there might be risk of rebellion. This doesn't just happen 2,000 years ago. This happens all the time. This continues to happen. It happens by making an example of people who don't respect the occupiers. Public dressing downs, public shamings, public beatings, public executions, whatever it takes to keep the fear of the empire's power in the top of the public's mind. This is the business of the domination system. It doesn't just happen politically. It happens economically, it happens religiously, it happens socially, it happens in every way. If this domination is resisted with violence, it will only be met with more violence. Violence backed by seemingly limitless resources of weapons, torture, death. There's lots of wood to form lots of crosses. Into this context, Jesus organizes a parade of his own. And this one isn't a show of power. It's not meant to be a guerrilla group wanting a coup, wanting to fight the occupying forces in combat. This parade is meant to be pure theater. It's satire worthy of Stephen Colbert, worthy of This Hour Has 22 Minutes, and meant to elicit a response exactly the same. Laughter. I mean, think about this. Instead of the mighty steed for the leader, up, 5 feet, What is the leader sitting on? A young donkey that barely raises him higher than he would be if he were standing up. It looks ridiculous, and that's the point. Where are the weapons of the protesters' army? There's not a sword, there's not a knife in sight. Instead, what do they have? Palm leaves. It looks ridiculous. That's the point. It's interesting, isn't it, the relationship we have to violence? It's such a part of our world and our socialization and our entertainment and our very instinct that equate there being only two ways of confronting it. You either meet violence with violence, or somehow this what became to be barf barf Christian ideal of meekness that can seem akin to cowardice, to run the other way. And here in this parade is the first step toward finding a third way. And this first step is the act of showing just how ridiculous the system that allows for this violence really is. Fight it with straightforward violence, and the uprising is over before it starts. Soldiers swoop in, trials take too long, kill now, ask questions later. Speak to it with speeches on the steps of the governor or on the steps of the temple, and the very words you speak are your conviction notice and execution notice. Soldiers swoop in the end. But speak in ways that mean something to your audience. The ones who are beaten down and worn out, speak to them in subversive symbol and metaphor, and then you've got the seeds of resistance. Here's a parade whose grand marshal has been teaching peace, teaching all these things that are threatening the control and status of those in the halls of power, and now put him on a donkey and illustrate that the weapons that the Romans have are irrelevant. Illustrate that the only weapons we have are palm branches. Big deal, right? Except those palm branches, they're alive, they grow, they're flexible, they're everywhere, much like the people seeking to rise up, like a mass of people desperate for change. And this parade marches right into the heart of the city. It's not violence, it's not cowardice, it's something else. It's entering right into the heart of the battle, and they do it laughing. They do it making fun of the powers that are right there under their noses watching. They march and they disarm their opponents with their farce. If a child is bullied at school, part of us wants our children to stand up for themselves. There's a part of us that want them to learn how to tackle this problem. But then there's equally another part of us that says we need to seek, and we need them to seek, some kind of nonviolent solution. We're torn because we so often think that nonviolence simply encourages living with the problem. Submission rather than creating an alternative. And this is where we're wrong. Mike was on a school bus, bullied every day, too small to fight the far sturdier bully. But he had a weakness that he made into a strength. His weakness was chronic sinusitis. One day, fed up with the bully's behavior, and at the end of his rope, he didn't know what to do, and then his nose reminded him. He blew a load of snot into his right hand. He approached his nemesis, hand outstretched, and he said, "I want to shake the hand of a real bully." The bigger boy retreated wide-eyed to his seat, and Mike reported the end of this small-time bully's career. Nonviolence shouldn't be misconstrued as a way to avoid conflict. That boy put himself right in the midst of the heat. The peace that Jesus was teaching is never the absence of conflict. We've often called for nonviolence when what we really want is tranquility. Those are different. In fact, nonviolence often seeks out conflict. It elicits it. It even initiates conflict in order to bring it out into the open and lance its sores, which is where it belongs, rather than let it creep around in the shadows, wreaking havoc. Nonviolence doesn't coddle or cajole aggressors, but moves against perceived injustice proactively, with the same eagerness as the most battle-hungry military general. Same zeal, different tactics. Palm Sunday must be our acknowledgement and consideration of our duty and responsibility to be resistors of domination. Our willingness to enter into conflicts that come with working for justice. I had a conversation a few Sundays ago at the door of the church, and it was about exactly what we're asked to do when we read that we're supposed to turn the other cheek. It seems like it's, at first, an instruction to invite further abuse, doesn't it? Strike me on one cheek, and here, I'll give you the other. You can hit that one too. But it's perhaps one of Jesus' most revolutionary political statements. And I want us to learn, and I want us to know, and I want us to practice why. Here's how it's been told to us. You've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not react violently against an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. The wisdom here is really fascinating. It's to refuse to oppose evil and violence on its own terms and on its own battlefield. Don't resist an evildoer on their own terms. Don't resist a bully on their own terms. Don't resist violence on its own terms. But instead, transcend both passivity and violence by finding a third way, one that's at once assertive and yet nonviolent. Don't repay evil with evil. So this cheek business, what is it about? Turn the other cheek. It would be abusive. It would be abusive to take this text as it's been taken in many churches for many generations. To say, turn the other cheek means just bite your lip and take it. It's not at all what Jesus is saying here. It's not what it means. It does not mean what we think it means. So some thinking here. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, what hand would it require of your opponent? Your right cheek, what hand does it require? Your left. The other person's left. It would require a left hand. Okay, so now let's go back 2 millennia. The left hand can only be used for unclean tasks. In many Jewish communities of that day, to gesture with the left hand even meant exclusion from meetings, penance for 10 days. You do not use your left hand. You don't eat with your left hand. You don't gesture with it because you do a lot of other unclean things with your left hand. I'll leave it there. So, if you have to use your right hand as an aggressor, how would you hit another person's right cheek? With a backhand. I I invite you to try hitting a person's right cheek with your right hand that isn't your backhand. It's a bit awkward. The only feasible blow is a backhand. And now we think about a backhand. It's not a blow to injure. The backhand is a blow to insult, to humiliate. The backhand is a blow to degrade someone. And again, let's go back to a different time. A person doesn't backhand an equal. We're in the 1st century. Masters backhanded slaves. Romans backhanded Jews. The point is to force someone back in line. It belongs squarely in the system. It's this domination system. It's get back where you belong. So Jesus is saying to all these people who are used to being degraded, and he's saying, refuse to accept this kind of treatment anymore. If they backhand you, turn the other cheek. Now, we really need to figure this out now. By turning the other cheek, the oppressed makes it impossible for the master to use his backhand again. Because again, he's not going to use his left hand. If you turn your other cheek, if you expose your left cheek, he cannot backhand you now with his right hand. So you can't backhand the person again. His nose is in the way. And anyway, it's like telling a joke twice. If it didn't work the first time, it's just not going to work. The left cheek now offers a perfect target for a blow with what? The right fist. Kapow. And here's the rub. Only equals fight with fists. We know this from Jewish sources, and the last thing the powerful wants to do is establish the underlings' equality. The last thing the powerful wants to do is hit someone beneath him with his right fist. This act of defiance renders the master incapable of asserting anything, any kind of dominance in this relationship. He could have the slave beaten. He could have the slave killed. Sure. What he will not do, though, is intimidate him any further. So in turning the other cheek, the inferior, the oppressed, the beaten is saying, look, I'm a human being. I'm equal to you. I refuse to be humiliated any longer, and I won't have it. You can imagine that this is no good way to avoid trouble. It's the opposite of being meek and mild and running. It's the opposite of just bearing down and taking whatever abuse comes. This is forcing the hand of the very ones who oppress you. What the domination system wants is meekness, and it probably won't be good for any of us that turn the other cheek. But the point has been made. The powers that be have lost their power to make people submit, and when large numbers of people believe that way and behave that way, and don't forget, Jesus spoke to thousands, you have a social revolution on your hands. So it begins with a ridiculous parade, but it doesn't stay that way. The wisdom of this day is in our reaction to power. Not just good old-fashioned power of the people, but the power that corrupts, the power that hangs over shoulders and keeps heads and necks stooped down. What the story of this day says to us is stand up for yourselves. Defy the power pressed upon you. Ridicule it where it's deserved. Assert your humanity and don't answer the oppressor on their own violent terms. Find a new way, a way that's neither passive nor violent. Don't turn into either a doormat or a punching bag. And equally, don't turn into the very thing, the violence and the power that you're trying to escape. So Walter Wink shares two examples with us. A woman confronts her soon-to-be attacker, engages him in conversation, gives him a task, and diffuses hostility. A man used to the way of violence chooses to put his knife away and give his shoe thief his socks as well. It becomes our task to practice with each other just what this non-violence must look like for us. What is this third way? What is the way that we will turn our cheek? What is this way that somehow comes between doing nothing and just accepting it and responding in the same vile, violent manner that we're rejecting? So I suggest we play the what-if scenarios at our dinner tables and in our cars as we drive. And we say, what if this happened to us? What should we do? Is that not the purpose of spiritual community and spiritual conversation? Is to rehearse the values that we say we have, to rehearse the practice and practice how we might respond so that we might be able to apply those values when it comes right down to it. How else will we rehearse just what it is we might do? It becomes our task to consider where we ourselves are burdened by the shackles of oppression, physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially, and how we might stand up to begin the hard work of freedom. This day reminds us that it's our task to commit ourselves to the work of those who need us to stand with them. Not with our checkbooks and either our individual or our congregational donations, but with our sweat, our courage, our cheeks, willing to take a few backhands for the thanks of it all. Palm Sunday reminds us that it becomes our task to consider how these palms, these symbols of a new way, a different way, a new freedom, will manifest in our own lives and in our own resistance. That's our task. May we be about it in so many ways. May we go into this week and into our lives knowing that we have a great light and a great responsibility. May we go in the face of all that might weigh on us to know that we have the power to stand on our own, to stand with each other, and to stand with those who need it most. May we go in the spirit of life and love.